He grabbed Ethan Walker by the throat and slammed him against the wall live on camera for the entire world to watch. The terrorist leader leaned in close, smiled into the lens, and whispered 6 words that turned every stomach in the command center. No one is coming for him. Then he raised 5 fingers. 5 hours. At sunrise, Ethan dies. 15 of America's most lethal Navy SEAL snipers were scrambled immediately. 15 of the deadliest shots alive. Every single one of them failed. But a 26-year-old weapons technician, a woman nobody had ever looked at twice, stepped forward and said she could do it. And she was right. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and follow every part to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The feed cut at exactly 4:47 in the morning. 1 second it was there, the grainy live stream, the flickering torchlight, the terrorist leader's face filling the screen with that calm, practiced cruelty that only truly dangerous men wear comfortably. And then it was gone. Static, black, nothing. Commander Michael Hayes stood in front of the monitor for 3 full seconds without moving. Around him, the command center breathed like a living thing, keyboards clicking, radio operators murmuring into headsets, a printer somewhere behind him spitting out updated satellite imagery. But Hayes didn't hear any of it. He was still seeing that face, that smile, the way the man had looked directly into the camera when he spoke, as if he could see all of them watching. As if he wanted them to watch. "Sir," one of his intelligence officers appeared at his elbow. "We've confirmed the compound location. Northern Ridgeline, Nevada Test and Training Range. Abandoned mining operation. They've been there at least 72 hours. Hayes turned slowly. "Hostage status. Alive, as of 14 minutes ago. The officer hesitated. "He's been roughed up, sir, but he's standing. He was standing." Hayes nodded once. That was something. That was everything, actually, because what came next depended entirely on Ethan Walker still being alive when sunrise hit, and sunrise was coming whether anyone was ready for it or not. He turned to face the room. 15 men stood along the back wall, most of them still in the process of studying the satellite imagery that had been handed out 6 minutes earlier. These weren't ordinary men. Hayes had been in special operations for 22 years, and even he felt something when he looked at this particular group assembled in this particular room. Master Chief Jonas Reyes had 3 confirmed long-range kills at over a mile. Senior Chief Daniel Torres had saved an entire extraction team in Afghanistan with a single shot taken through a moving vehicle window in 40-knot winds. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb had a kill at 2.4 miles that still stood as a record in his unit. 15 men, 15 of the finest precision shooters the United States Navy had ever produced. And every single one of them was looking at the terrain map like it had personally insulted them. "Talk to me," Hayes said, moving toward the group. Reyes spoke first, which was expected. He was the senior man, and he carried himself the way senior men do, like the room already belonged to him. "The only viable firing position is here." He tapped the map. "Northwest approach, elevated shelf, natural rock concealment. We can get a man there before first light." "Range," Hayes asked. 4,312 yards from the primary target zone. Reyes said it the way you say a number that isn't a problem yet. Flat, informational. Hayes looked at him, and Reyes exhaled slowly. "And it's manageable. Wind is the issue. We've got a mountain system funneling 2 separate air currents through that valley, one off the ridge line at approximately 15 knots. One thermal layer rising from the canyon floor that our meteorology team is still calculating. The shot itself, the ballistics, that's solvable. The wind reading the live adjustments, that's where it gets complicated." "How complicated?" Torres stepped forward. "Sir, I want to be straight with you. 4,300 yards is the outer limit of what any of us have attempted in a real-world engagement. We've trained past that in controlled conditions. But controlled conditions don't account for compound wind factors in mountain terrain after a temperature drop. Every calculation we have right now is based on incomplete data." "So what are you telling me?" Hayes kept his voice even. "We're telling you we can do this," Webb said from the back, and there was an edge in his voice that hadn't been in Torres's. "We're not saying we can't. We're saying it needs to be one shot, it needs to be the right man's behind the rifle, and it needs to be timed to the second when that target is in the open." Hayes looked at each of them. He had known men like this his entire career. Pride wasn't the enemy of competence in this room, it was part of what made them good. But pride was also the thing that sometimes stopped a man from saying the word he needed to say. And right now, Hayes needed everybody in this room to say whatever was true, not whatever sounded best. All right, he said, here's how we do this. We are not sending one man out there and betting everything on a single attempt with no margin. We rotate. Reyes goes first. You get your shot. If the target presents and the conditions are within tolerance, you take it. If it doesn't land, Torres is already in position and he takes the next window. We cycle through until we either have a confirmed kill or until conditions make engagement impossible. Nobody argued. Nobody looked happy either. Reyes just nodded and said, "Understood, sir," and began gathering his equipment. The first attempt came at 5:21 in the morning. Hayes watched the drone feed with his arms crossed and his jaw set. The compound below was lit by 3 separate generators, pools of harsh white light in the darknesses, throwing long shadows across the courtyard. Figures moved. Guards rotated positions with a professionalism that told Hayes these men had been trained, not just recruited. This wasn't an amateur operation. Whatever the terrorist leader had built here, he had built it carefully. The radio clicked. Reyes's voice quiet and controlled. "Bravo 1 in position. I have eyes on the primary zone. Wind to standby." A pause. Hayes watched the feed. In the courtyard below, 2 figures crossed through the light and disappeared into a doorway. "Wind is reading 12 knots off the ridge, variable. I'm tracking a thermal shift in the canyon layer. Give me 60 seconds. "You have 60, Hayes said. The seconds went by. Hayes watched his own hands. He had not realized until that moment that he was gripping the edge of the command table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. He released the pressure deliberately and made himself breathe. "Bravo 1, target has not presented. I'm seeing movement inside the main structure, south window. I believe he's moving toward the exterior door on the east side of the compound." "Stay with it," Hayes said. "Roger." Another pause. "Wind shift. Canyon thermal just kicked. I'm recalculating. Adjusted hold is..." Then 3 seconds later, the sound that nobody wanted to hear. The shot. A clean, distant crack through the radio feed, and then silence. "Miss," Reyes said, and the single word landed in the command center like something falling from a great height. Flat. Final. 4 meters right, wind pushed harder than the thermal model predicted at point of impact. "I need another window." Hayes closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. "Torres, you're up." This was how the next 2 hours went. One by one, the finest snipers in the United States Navy settled behind that rifle on that cold mountain shelf and tried to do something that had never been done in the field. One by one they missed. Some were close. Webb came within 18 inches on his second attempt, and the room held its breath so hard that Hayes could feel the pressure change, and then the wind shifted in the final 300 yards of the bullet's travel, and the shot died harmlessly against a concrete wall. Torres put 2 rounds into the edge of the target zone before the terrorist leader stepped back inside the building and was gone for another 47 minutes. Even Reyes, going again on his 3rd rotation, put his round exactly where his calculations said it should go, and the wind did something that the models had not predicted, something that 3 separate meteorology teams watching the same data had not caught. And the bullet deviated and the target walked away without knowing how close he had come to dying. 7 attempts, 7 misses. The room was not panicking. Trained people don't panic, not openly, but Hayes had been in command long enough to read the particular kind of silence that settles over professionals when they begin to understand that what they are trying to do may simply not be possible. It was not defeat. It was the early edge of something darker than defeat, because defeat is clean, and this was not. This was the slow, grinding recognition that the right approach executed by the right people might still not be enough. And that recognition in a room where a man's life hung on the next 30 minutes was very nearly unbearable. Hayes stepped away from the main console and moved to the window. Outside, the Nevada sky was beginning to shift, just barely. Just the faintest lifting at the eastern edge, the darkness going from pure black towards something with a hint of deep blue in it. Maybe 45 minutes until genuine first light. Maybe less. He turned around, and that was when he heard it. A voice, quiet, almost too quiet. From the far end of the room near the secondary equipment stations where the support personnel worked, the people you didn't usually notice, unless something broke, the technicians and analysts and logistics specialists who kept the operation running while the operators got the glory. "Sir," Hayes looked. He almost didn't see her at first because she was standing very still, and she was not demanding attention the way his snipers demanded attention simply by existing. She was a young woman in a standard specialist uniform, dark hair pulled back, standing straight but not rigid, holding a tablet in one hand and looking directly at him with an expression that was not nervous and was not aggressive and was somehow both of those things at once. He'd seen her before, he was almost certain of it, around the base in the equipment bays at the edges of briefings. One of the weapons technicians assigned to the unit's support staff. Specialist, he said, because it was on her uniform and because he could not immediately locate her name. Carter, sir. Emma Carter. She didn't step forward. She waited. I've been running models on the engagement since the first attempt missed. I have a solution. The room went very, very still. Not because anyone believed her. Hayes could feel the mixture of skepticism and pity and barely suppressed irritation radiating from the men along the back wall. Reyes had gone completely still in the particular way that experienced men go still when they are choosing not to say something they very much want to say. Webb turned away, which was its own kind of answer. But something made Hayes cross the room. Maybe it was the 45 minutes of darkness left before sunrise. Maybe it was 7 missed shots in a hostage whose time was running out. Maybe it was something in the way Emma Carter was looking at him, not like someone asking permission, but like someone who had already done the work and was now waiting for the room to catch up. He stopped in front of her. Talk. She turned the tablet toward him. The screen was covered in calculations. Not the standard ballistic tables that every sniper in the room had already worked through, but something different. Layered wind modeling. Atmospheric density gradients plotted across the vertical range of the bullet's travel. Something that looked to Hayes's eye like what an aerospace engineer would put together if you gave them a sniper problem. The wind models everyone has been using are treating the 2 air currents in that valley as separate systems, Emma said. Her voice was steady and she was speaking quickly, but not rushed the way someone speaks when they have been rehearsing in their head for a long time and the words are finally coming out. They're not separate. They interact at approximately 1,800 yards from the firing position right at the top of the canyon lip. The thermal pushes the ridge current. It doesn't just mix with it. That's why every shot that's come close has pushed right. The interaction point is creating a consistent lateral force that nobody's adjusted for because the standard models don't capture it. Hayes looked at the screen. You're saying the meteorology teams missed this. I'm saying the models they're using don't have the resolution to catch it. They're using regional data. I've been pulling sensor data from 3 weather stations on the ridgeline and running a fluid dynamics simulation on the valley airflow. She scrolled to another screen. This is what the wind actually looks like at each 100-yard increment. This is the adjusted hold. The number she showed him was different from what any of his snipers had been using. Significantly different. You've never made this shot, Hayes said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the most important fact in the room, and someone had to say it out loud. No, sir. She met his eyes. But I know what the shot requires, and I know why it's been missed. If you give me the rifle and the window, I can make it. Behind him, he heard Reyes say very quietly, Sir, with respect. I know, Jonas. Hayes didn't turn around. He kept looking at Emma. How long have you been working on this? Since the second miss, sir, about an hour and 40 minutes. Hayes looked at the sky through the window, then at the tablet, then at Emma Carter's face. He made his decision. Carter, he handed her back the tablet. Get your gear. You're in position in 20 minutes. The silence that followed was unlike any other silence Hayes had heard in 22 years of command. It was the silence of 15 highly trained men watching something they did not know how to process, a young woman they had never looked at twice, walking out of the room to attempt the shot that all of them had failed. Some of them were angry. He could feel that. Some of them were embarrassed, though they would never say so. And a few of them, the best ones, the ones with enough honesty to look past their own wounded pride, were watching her go with something that looked very much like hope. Hayes turned back to the main console. 40 minutes until sunrise. The mission clock was still running. On the drone feed, the compound below was fully lit, the guards rotating on their schedules with mechanical precision, and somewhere in the main structure of that abandoned mining operation, a CIA field officer with a family and a life and everything to live for was counting down the minutes he had left. Emma Carter was already moving. And in the command center on a Nevada mountain for the first time in 2 hours, nobody was saying she couldn't do it. They were just watching, waiting, holding everything they had, every breath, every word, every doubt, holding it all in the dark just before dawn, while a 26-year-old specialist they had never given a second thought walked out into the cold to try to do something that 15 of the best shooters in the world had decided was impossible. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The clock moved. The sky was changing. 5:43 a.m. Emma Carter walked out of that command center, and nobody stopped her. That was the thing that stayed with her, not the silence, not the stares, not the barely concealed contempt on Reyes's face when Hayes gave the order. It was the fact that not one of those 15 men followed her out to help. Not one of them offered a word. Not one of them said anything at all. They just watched her go the way you watch someone walk towards something you have already decided is going to end badly. She told herself it didn't matter. She had been telling herself that for 3 years. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside, sharp and immediate, cutting through her jacket like it had a purpose. She didn't stop moving. The equipment case was already waiting. Master Sergeant Doyle, the only person on the support staff who had heard her in the command center and believed even 10% of what she said, had pulled the rifle from the armory without being asked and had it staged near the north vehicle bay. He was standing beside it when she arrived, a big, quiet man with 20 years of service behind him, and the particular kind of loyalty that comes from watching too many good people get ignored for too long. "You sure about this?" he asked. Emma picked up the case. "I've been sure about this for the last 2 hours. I just needed someone to listen." Doyle nodded once. He didn't say good luck. Men like him didn't say good luck. He said wind sensor data is still updating on Channel 4. Keep it open. "Already have it," she said, and she was moving. The route to the firing position was a 40-minute climb in the dark, and Emma made it in 31. Not because she was trying to prove something, because she was running numbers in her head the entire way, and she needed to be set up and stable before the thermal shift in the canyon reached its peak, and every minute she was moving was a minute she wasn't shooting. Her legs burned on the final approach, the last 200 meters of loose rock and steep grade that the SEAL teams had been rotating through all night. She could see the marks where they had set up small disturbances in the gravel, a spent cartridge case that someone had not policed up a piece of tape on a rock marking the exact firing position. She settled in and opened the case, 5:58 a.m., 32 minutes until sunrise. The radio clicked, Hayes's voice flat and controlled. "Carter, give me a status." "In position," she said. "Setting up now. I need 4 minutes." A pause. "You have 4 minutes." She began working. Not frantically, she had learned a long time ago that panic in the setup phase costs you twice as much time as it saves, and the hands that shake while you zero the scope are the same hands that shake on the trigger. She moved with a kind of deliberate precision that had nothing to do with calmness and everything to do with discipline. Her grandfather had taught her that. Big John Carter, the Marine sniper legend who had spent Emma's entire childhood sitting on his porch in rural Virginia, explaining the difference between those two things to anyone who would listen. "Calm is something you feel," he used to say. "Discipline is something you do regardless of what you feel. You're never going to feel calm when it matters. So stop trying, just do the next right thing." She was doing the next right thing. Wind sensor channel 4, current reading at the ridge 11 knots northeast. Canyon thermal rising, she could see it in the data, the temperature gradient climbing as the earth below began releasing the heat it had stored from the previous afternoon. The interaction point she had identified in the command center was already forming right at 1,800 yards, right where her model said it would be. Two air masses pressing against each other in the dark, creating a corridor of turbulence that had sent 7 shots wide and had frustrated 15 men who were better shooters than most people alive. But they had been solving the wrong problem. That was the thing. Every one of them had been trying to read the wind at the firing position and project it forward. Emma had been modeling what the wind actually did in the space between the rifle and the target. And those were two entirely different approaches, and one of them worked and one of them didn't. And she had known that since the second miss at 5:23 and had spent 90 minutes building the proof while everybody in the command center looked through her like she wasn't there. She keyed the radio. "Carter to command, I'm set. Talk to me about target movement." Hayes answered immediately. "Target has been inside the main structure for 11 minutes. Last confirmed sighting was the east doorway. We have 2 guards in the courtyard rotating on a 7-minute cycle. Intelligence says the leader has been making regular appearances at the east entrance he's been performing for the cameras. Next window is likely within the next 10 to 15 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes. Emma exhaled slowly. That was enough time if the thermal behaved the way her model said it would. It was not enough time if she was wrong. She settled into the rifle, adjusted her position, and began the process of waiting. 6:04 a.m. Inside the command center, the atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically trained, people don't let atmospheres change dramatically, or at least they try not to. But Hayes had been in enough rooms at enough critical moments to feel the shift underneath the professionalism. The 15 snipers who had cycled through that firing position were standing in various postures of controlled tension, watching the drone feed, watching the clock, watching everything except each other, because looking at each other right now meant acknowledging something none of them wanted to say. Reyes broke first, not loudly. He never did anything loudly. He stepped up beside Hayes and spoke quietly enough that only Hayes could hear. "Sir, I want to go back out there." "No," Hayes said. "Agree with respect, Carter is a technician. Whatever model she's built, whatever she thinks she knows, she has never engaged a live target under field conditions. If she misses, we lose the window, and we lose the hostage." "If she misses," Hayes said, "we are exactly where we were 20 minutes ago, which is 7 shots down and running out of time. So the math hasn't changed, Jonas. The only thing that's changed is I have someone out there who thinks she sees something you all missed. And given the last 2 hours, I'm not in a position to argue with that." Reyes said nothing for a moment. Then, "You should have let me look at her models." "Would you have?" Hayes asked. The silence that followed was its own answer. 6:09 a.m. On the ridge, Emma heard the sound before she processed it. A door. The east entrance. Movement. She stilled completely. Not the forced stillness of someone fighting their own body, but the natural stillness that her grandfather had spent years building into her, the kind that comes from the muscles understanding. Before the brain does that, this is the moment. "Command," she said barely above a whisper. "I have movement at the east entrance." Hayes's voice immediately. "Stand by. Drone is repositioning. Give me 15 seconds. 15 seconds was a very long time when a door was opening. She saw him, the terrorist leader, walking into the courtyard with the particular confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable, shoulders back, deliberate pace, the body language of someone who wanted to be seen. He was performing again even without a camera directly in front of him. Some people perform constantly. It's how they remind themselves they're real. He stopped near the center of the courtyard. Emma's breathing went automatic, in out slow, her crosshairs settled. "Command," she said. "I have the target. He is stationary. I am ready to engage." A pause, half a second that felt like something much longer. "Carter," Hayes said, "wind status. Within model parameters." She was already adjusting not with conscious thought, but with the calculation she had been running for 2 hours made physical. Made instinct the numbers living in her hands now, instead of on a screen. "Ridge current 11 knots, canyon thermal compensated. Adjusted hold is set. I have a clean window." Another half second. "Take the shot," Hayes said. Emma's world went quiet. Not silent, the wind was there. The radio, static was there. The distant sound of the compound generators was there. But the noise that usually lived inside her head, the noise that had been living there since the first rejection, led her 3 years ago, since every door that closed, since every evaluation board that looked at her file and looked at her face and decided without asking that she did not belong in this world, all of that went quiet. She exhaled half a breath and held the rest. The trigger broke. The rifle pushed back against her shoulder. And then there was nothing to do but wait. 6 seconds is how long a bullet travels 4,300 yards. 6 seconds is also how long it takes to understand that you have either changed everything or changed nothing. Emma did not watch the target through the scope. She had been taught by her grandfather, by 3 years of self-directed study, by every physics textbook she had read at her own kitchen table. After the program stopped accepting her applications, she had been taught that watching the target in those final seconds does nothing except give you something to be wrong about. The bullet is already gone. The math is already done. All you can do is breathe and know that you either got it right or you didn't. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Command box, she said on 6. An impact The pause that followed was 3 seconds long and contained the longest silence of Emma Carter's life. Then Hayes's voice came through the radio, and it was different. Not dramatically different. He was a commander. He had iron in his voice at all times. But there was something underneath the iron that had not been there before. Confirmed kill, he said. Target is down. Emma, that's a confirmed kill. The room behind him erupted. She heard it through the radio. Not words, just sound, the sudden release of 2 hours of compressed tension coming out of 15-minute once. Even through the static, it was enormous. It was the sound of people who had stopped believing something suddenly being forced to believe it again. Emma put her cheek back against the stock because she had already seen something else. 6:17 a.m. Command! Her voice was sharp, fast. I have secondary threats. Armed personnel moving from the south structure toward the courtyard. I count, 6 correction, 8 moving fast. They're heading for the hostage. The eruption in the command center stopped. Hayes's voice cut through instantly. Rescue team is 90 seconds out. Can you hold them? Working on it, Emma said, and she was already moving to the first secondary target. This was different from the primary shot. The primary shot had been physics, pure solvable patient. This was something else entirely. 8 armed men moving at various speeds across a lit courtyard, some taking cover, some still processing that their leader had just fallen. Emma had trained for this in theory, in the shooting manuals she had studied, in the ballistic tables she had memorized, in the hours she had spent dry firing in her apartment at 2 in the morning because she could not sleep and could not stop calculating and could not make herself accept that nobody would ever give her a chance to prove what she knew. Theory was about to become something else. First target, radio operator northeast corner of the courtyard. She identified him by the equipment he was carrying. If he got a signal, out the compound's external contacts would know what was happening. She adjusted, held, fired. Hit. Second target, the man who had already broken into a sprint toward the building where Ethan Walker was being held. She tracked him, moving target, different calculation, full lead, compensate for the canyon thermal, which was now fully active and pushing hard at the valley floor. She fired. Hit. Command, she said, already moving to target 3. Radio operator down. Primary threat to hostage location neutralized. I have 6 remaining. Rescue team status. 60 seconds, Hayes said, and she could hear him breathing faster than usual, which meant he was watching the drone feed and seeing the same thing she was calculating. They're going to be close, Emma. Make it count. I know, she said and fired again. Third target. Missed. The man had gone prone behind a vehicle, and she caught the edge of the door frame instead of the target. She immediately recalculated, adjusted 2 degrees, left, waited for his exposure. In the command center, the room was watching the drone feed in absolute silence now. Reyes was leaning forward, not with contempt, with something that looked for the first time like genuine attention. Webb had stopped looking away. Torres had moved closer to the screen without realizing he was doing it, the way you move towards something that has caught you completely off guard and you haven't yet decided how to feel about it. Fourth target, down. Fifth, down. The third target reappeared. Emma fired. Down. 6:19 a.m. Emma, Hayes's voice was tight. Rescue team is on the ground. They're at the north entrance. I have 2 armed fighters between them and the hostage. Can you... I see them, she said. She did not have a clean angle on both. One was partially masked by the structure itself, body behind the wall, weapon arm, visible enough of a target to work with if she was willing to accept a lower probability of a clean stop. She did the math in under a second. Probability. Risk to rescue team. Time available. Distance. She fired on the lower probability target first. Hit not clean, but enough. The man went down and stayed down. The second target spun toward the sound of the first shot falling, which gave her the angle she needed, and she took it, and the rescue team was already moving through the north entrance before the echo had finished crossing the valley. The radio was chaos now. Rescue team calling positions, command, responding, the drone operator calling out clearance as room by room. The structure was confirmed clean. Emma lay on the cold rock and listened to it all and made herself stay in position, because she had been taught that you stay in position until you are told to stand down, regardless of how the adrenaline in your blood is screaming at you to move. Bravo 2, we have the package. The rescue team leader's voice breathing hard. Say again, we have the package. Hostage is ambulatory. We are moving to extraction. Hayes, copy that. Get him out. Emma closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and began clearing her position. 6:24 a.m. She was halfway down the ridge when the radio clicked again. Hayes. Carter, outstanding work. Come back in. She didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about something her grandfather had said the last time she saw him alive 2 winters ago. Sitting in that same porch chair with a cup of coffee he never seemed to actually drink. He had looked at her. Really looked at her the way he did when he was about to say something he had been holding for a long time, and he had said, Emma, the hardest shot you will ever take isn't the longest one. It's the first one. After you've been told enough times that you're not supposed to be there. She keyed the radio. Copy that, sir. Coming in. When she walked back through the door of the command center 11 minutes later, the room was different, and it was the same room, and she was different, and she was the same person who had walked out of it 43 minutes ago. The drone feed was still running. The radio operators were still at their stations. The mission clock was still ticking, even though the mission was over because nobody had thought to stop it yet. Reyes was standing near the center of the room. He looked at her when she came in. Not the way he had looked at her before, not through her, not past her, not with that particular brand of professional dismissal that she had been on the receiving end of for 3 years. He looked at her directly the way you look at someone you have just been forced to recalibrate completely, and he said 2 words. Good shot. Emma nodded once. Thank you, Master Chief. He started to say something else, stopped, nodded, and moved away. Whatever he had been about to say, it wasn't the right time, and both of them knew it. There would be time later for the larger conversation, for the questions about her models, about her training, about how she had built what she had built while sitting at support stations and submitting rejected applications. Right now, the room was still coming down from 2 hours of failure and 6 minutes of something they had never seen before, and the space between those two things needed a minute to breathe. Hayes crossed the room toward her. He didn't smile. He wasn't a man who smiled in the command center. It wasn't who he was, but there was something in his eyes that she recognized because she had been waiting for it for 3 years without letting herself admit she was waiting for it. He said, I want to see those models, all of them, after the debrief. Yes, sir, Emma said. And Carter. He stopped. I owe you an apology, not just me. This room owes you one. She looked at him steadily. Sir, with respect, I don't need an apology. I need a program. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not a smile, but close. The kind of thing that appears on a commander's face when someone says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, the thing he had been waiting for someone to say for longer than he realized. We'll talk, he said. Outside, the Nevada sky had gone fully light. Sunrise had arrived the way it always does, indifferent to what happened underneath it, neither celebrating nor mourning, just marking time. The compound below was quiet now. The rescue helicopter was already 20 minutes gone, carrying Ethan Walker away from the mountain and back toward the world he had almost lost for good. Emma Carter stood in the command center and breathed. She had made the shot nobody could make. She had done the thing the room said was impossible. And she was already thinking about the next problem because that was who she was. That was who she had always been in every empty application and every closed door, and every night she spent at a kitchen table building the proof that nobody was asking for yet. She was still thinking about the next problem when Webb appeared at her elbow. Marcus Webb, third best long-range shot in the United States Navy by official record, a man with more confirmed kills at distance than most people thought was possible. He stood beside her and stared at the now dark monitor for a moment before speaking. The fluid dynamics model, he said, for the canyon-wind interaction. Where did you learn that? Emma glanced at him. My father was an aerospace engineer. He used to make me model airflow around wing structures on weekends. Webb stared at her. On weekends? I was 12, she said. We didn't have a lot of cable channels. Something happened on Webb's face that might, in different lighting, have been the beginning of a laugh. It didn't fully arrive, but it was close. I want to understand what you built, he said, not to replicate it, to understand it. Emma nodded. I'll walk you through it. He nodded back and moved away, and she watched him go and understood something that she hadn't quite had language for until this moment, that the people in this room were not her enemies. They never had been. They were people who had been given a system that told them where to look for excellence, and the system had not told them to look where she was standing, and so they hadn't. That wasn't generosity on her part. It was just the truth of it, clean and without bitterness, because bitterness was something she had burned through a long time ago, and there was nothing useful left of it. The truth was simple. She had been invisible because the system made her invisible. And the shot that morning had not made her visible so much as it had made the system wrong in a way that was impossible to ignore. Everything that came after that was just detail. 6:41 a.m. Commander Hayes was already on the phone with Special Operations Command when Emma sat down at the secondary console and began organizing her data for the debrief. She could hear pieces of his conversation, not enough to follow, but enough to understand the tone. Something was moving, something larger than the mission. She pulled up her wind model and began annotating it for presentation. Around her, the command center continued its work. People moved, radios clicked, the normal machinery of an operation and its aftermath ground forward. But something had shifted in the room in a way that was hard to name precisely. The people who had looked through her an hour ago were not looking through her now. Nobody was making eye contact in a way that meant they couldn't. They were looking at her the way people look at something they are still trying to understand, and she could live with that. Understanding takes time. She had waited this long. She could wait a little longer. 7:02 a.m. The debrief room smelled like cold coffee and too many people who hadn't slept. Hayes sat at the head of the table. Emma was 3 seats down on the left side, her tablet in front of her, her models loaded and annotated and ready. The 15 snipers filled the rest of the chairs, and the intelligence officers and meteorology team lined the walls, and nobody in the room was entirely comfortable, which Hayes had decided was exactly the right atmosphere for what needed to happen next. He didn't open with pleasantries. He never did. This morning, he said, we had a failure. I want to be precise about what kind of failure it was because precision matters in this room more than it matters almost anywhere else. He let that sit for a second. The failure was not shooting. Every man at this table is an exceptional shooter. The failure was analytical. We went into an engagement with incomplete atmospheric modeling. We recognized the problem after the first miss, and we continued applying the same incomplete model for 6 more attempts without fundamentally rethinking our approach. He paused. Specialist Carter rethought the approach in 90 minutes while sitting at a support station that none of us were paying attention to. The room was very quiet. Reyes, to his credit, did not look away. He was looking directly at Hayes with the expression of a man who is taking his medicine because he knows he earned it. Carter, Hayes said, walk us through it. Emma stood. She had rehearsed this, not the words exactly, but the structure of it, the sequence in which the pieces needed to be presented so that the conclusion was inevitable rather than argued. Her grandfather had taught her that too. Don't convince people, he used to say. Show them the terrain and let them convince themselves. She pulled up the first screen. The standard ballistic model everyone was using treats atmospheric conditions as layered but independent variables. Wind at the firing position, wind at mid-range, wind near the target. You read each one, you average them with a weighted calculation based on time of flight through each zone, and you apply a composite hold. That model works at most engagement ranges. At 4,300 yards, it doesn't work when you have 2 competing air masses creating an interaction effect at a fixed point along the flight path. She pulled up the fluid dynamics overlay. This is what the wind actually looks like in that valley. The ridge current and the canyon thermal don't blend. They compress against each other at approximately 1,800 yards out. That compression creates a lateral pressure spike that lasts for roughly 400 yards of the bullet's travel. Every shot that came close pushed right by a consistent margin. That consistency was the signature of a fixed interaction point, not random variance. Webb leaned forward. How did you identify the interaction point without direct measurement? 3 weather stations on the ridgeline, Emma said. I pulled their data independently and ran a pressure differential model across the valley cross-section. The interaction point showed up as a temperature and pressure anomaly at a specific altitude band. Once I had the location, I could calculate the lateral force at that point for any given wind speed combination. That's aerospace modeling, Torres said, not accusatory, genuinely surprised. Yes, Emma said. My father is an aerospace engineer. I grew up doing this kind of analysis. I didn't know it applied to long-range ballistics until I started studying sniper doctrine on my own about 4 years ago. On your own, Reyes said slowly. I applied to precision shooting programs 3 times, Emma said, and she kept her voice completely level when she said it because she had decided before walking into this room that she was not going to perform bitterness or perform injury, she was just going to state facts. I was rejected each time. My scores on every qualifying assessment were in the top 8% of all applicants. The rejections didn't include specific feedback. The silence that followed that statement was a different kind of silence from the one earlier. This one had weight to it, the kind of weight that accumulates when a room full of people simultaneously realizes they are part of a system that did something wrong, and the evidence of how wrong it was is standing 3 feet away, having just saved a man's life. Hayes said, noted, continue, 7:19 a.m. Emma walked them through the rest of the model, the adjusted hole calculation, the timing window. She had identified for the thermal peak the reason she had known the target would present at the east entrance based on behavioral pattern analysis she had run on the live stream footage from the previous evening. That last part surprised even Hayes. She had not just solved the ballistics problem, she had predicted the target's movement. You ran behavioral analysis, Hayes said. The target made 4 separate camera appearances in the 6 hours before the operation. Each appearance was at the east entrance, always within a 12-minute window of the previous guard rotation. He was performing for an audience, and performers have patterns. She pulled up the timeline. I calculated a 73% probability that he would present at the east entrance between 6:14 and 6:22. He presented at 6:17. Webb made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. You predicted him. I modeled his behavior, Emma said. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting, Webb said. Reyes had been quiet for several minutes. Now he spoke. Carter, the secondary engagements. After the primary target was down, you engaged 8 moving targets in approximately 6 minutes at 4,300 yards in variable wind conditions with no spotter. He stopped. How many had you ever engaged simultaneously before this morning? Emma looked at him. 0, sir. Nobody moved. 0 live engagements, Reyes said carefully, and you hit 6 of 8. 7 of 8, Emma said. The third target was a graze, not a clean stop. He went down, but the hit wasn't center mass. I reclassified it as a partial. Reyes stared at her for a long moment. Then he said something that Emma would remember for the rest of her life, not because it was the most important thing said in that room, but because of who said it and what it cost him. I have been doing this for 16 years, he said. I have never engaged more than 3 moving targets sequentially at that distance. 7 of 8 variable wind, no spotter first live engagements. He shook his head slowly. That's not training. That's something else. Hayes looked at Reyes. Jonas, what are you saying? Reyes looked at Emma. I'm saying we had the wrong people in the program. He said it quietly and he said it completely, and he did not dress it up or qualify it. I don't know how many others are out there like Carter, but I know we built a selection process that wouldn't have found her, and this morning proved what that costs. The room absorbed that. It took a moment. Then Hayes said, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Because that's the conversation we're going to have next, 11:31 a.m. He pulled out a folder of physical paper, the kind Hayes used when he wanted people to understand that what was inside was real and not theoretical. He slid it to the center of the table. Special Operations Command has been developing a framework for a new precision engagement initiative for 14 months. It's been stalled at the proposal stage because nobody could agree on selection criteria. He tapped the folder. As of this morning, I have the operational proof I need to move it forward. The existing sniper selection model is built on a set of assumptions about what excellent long-range shooters look like. This morning demonstrated that those assumptions are incomplete. Torres said, what does the new model look like? That's what we're going to figure out, Hayes said. Starting with Carter's application history and working backward. He looked at Emma. I pulled your file this morning while you were on the ridge. You want to know what I found? Emma said. Yes, sir. 3 applications. Top 8% scores across every technical assessment. Marksmanship evaluations that your range supervisors rated as, quote, exceptional for her assignment level. Physical standards met on all 3 attempts. He closed the folder. Rejections with no specific documentation of disqualifying the factors, which means somebody looked at the file and made a judgment call that they didn't write down. The room was very still again. Emma said, I know, sir. You knew. I suspected. I requested feedback after the second rejection. I was told the program was highly competitive and to keep improving my qualifications. My qualifications went up after that. I was rejected again. She paused. I stopped applying. I requested a transfer to weapons systems support because at least there I was working with the equipment and I thought eventually something would change. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Something changed this morning. Yes, sir, she said. It did, 7:44 a.m. What happened next was not part of any official agenda. Reyes pushed back his chair and stood up. He was a tall man, and he had the physical presence of someone who had spent his entire adult life in places where physical presence kept you alive. And when he stood up, the room noticed. He looked at Emma across the table and he said, I owe you an apology, a real one, not a procedural one. He stopped and Emma could see him choosing his words the way a careful man chooses his footing on uncertain ground. When Hayes gave you the order this morning, I said something under my breath. You didn't hear it. I'm going to tell you what it was. The room was absolutely still. I said, this is a waste of time. He held her gaze. I was wrong, not just about this morning. About what I assumed before this morning, before I ever heard you speak, before I ever looked at anything you'd built. He exhaled. I have a daughter. She's 19. She wants to go into military service. And I just watched what happens when a system decides what she's worth before she gets a chance to show it. He sat back down. I'm sorry, Specialist Carter. Emma looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, Master Chief. I appreciate that. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't dismissal. It was acknowledgement, which was all she had ever asked for, really not to be forgiven for demanding a chance, not to be celebrated for taking one. Just to be seen accurately. Just to have the math be the math without the extra variables that had nothing to do with performance. Hayes let the moment breathe for exactly as long as it needed to. Then he moved on because that was his job, and the mission was not over, and the room had work to do. Intelligence update, he said, and the room shifted back into operational mode. The intelligence officer standing against the wall, a lean, quiet man named Kowalski, who Emma had seen in briefings but never spoken to, stepped forward and pulled up a new map on the wall screen. We have a problem, Kowalski said. 30 minutes ago, a convoy departed from a secondary compound location approximately 40 miles northeast. 30 fighters minimum, 4 armored vehicles. We have confirmation of anti-air assets. He paused. They're heading for the primary compound. Hayes reinforcements. That's the assessment, sir. They don't know their leader is down yet. Communications from the compound went dark when Carter took out the radio operator. But they have a check-in protocol, and when the compound misses its window, they'll know something happened. At their current speed, they hit the compound area in approximately 40 minutes. The rescue force, Hayes said. 22 minutes out from the extraction point. If the convoy reaches the valley before extraction is complete. Kowalski stopped. He didn't need to finish. Hayes turned. Emma. She was already looking at the map, already running numbers. The distance from the firing position to the convoy route was approximately 4,800 yards at the closest point. Moving targets vehicles, not personnel. Anti-air assets meant the helicopters that had been supporting the operation needed to stay out of engagement range. There was no air support option. There was no artillery. The valley approach was a single road through difficult terrain. There was one option. I need to get back to the firing position, Emma said. Reyes stood up immediately. I'm going with you. Emma looked at him. I don't need a spotter for vehicles. No, Reyes said, but you might need someone to cover your position if any of those fighters dismount and push up the ridge. He held her gaze. Let me do something useful. She looked at Hayes. Hayes nodded once. Go, both of you. Move. 7:51 a.m. they were running. Emma had already made the climb once that morning. Her legs knew the route, the loose rock section at 200 meters, the false shelf at the halfway point, the final steep push to the firing position. Reyes was beside her and he ran the way experienced operators run economical and fast without burning anything he'd need later, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say that the situation hadn't already said. Convoy entry into effective range, Emma said into the radio as she climbed. Kowalski's voice. Estimated 18 minutes to your optimal engagement window. They're moving fast. 18 minutes. She could make that. Talk to me about the vehicles, she said, breathing through the climb. Armor-type engine placement, lead vehicle configuration. Kowalski pulled up the drone feed and began describing. Emma listened and converted as she went, not writing anything down, just building the picture in her head, the way she had always built pictures, the way her father had taught her to see a mechanical system as a set of interdependent components, each with its own vulnerability, each connected to the others in ways that became obvious once you knew where to look. Armored vehicles at 4,800 yards. She had never attempted a vehicle engine kill at that distance. Nobody had as far as she knew under field conditions. She didn't think about that. She thought about engine block dimensions, about the specific geometry of how an armored vehicle's front panel distributes incoming force, about where a high-powered rifle round needed to land to guarantee a catastrophic mechanical failure rather than just a dent. She ran the numbers on the climb, and she had them ready before she reached the top. 8:04 a.m. Back in position, equipment case open, rifle up. Command Carter is set, Reyes said into his radio, watching the approach road through binoculars from a position 3 meters to Emma's left. We have eyes on the convoy. Lead vehicle is approximately 6,000 yards in closing. Hayes, copy? Emma, you have the call. Engage when you're ready. She settled into the rifle. Breathed. The convoy was visible in the growing morning light, 4 vehicles moving in tight formation, dust rising behind them. The lead vehicle slightly ahead of the others, in the way. Lead vehicles always are when the driver is confident about what's in front of him. He shouldn't have been confident. Emma's first shot hit the lead vehicle's engine block at 4,812 yards. The vehicle didn't explode. That was a movie thing, and this was not a movie. It seized. The engine locked catastrophically, the vehicle lurched hard right, and at the speed they were traveling, it went off the road and came to a violent stop against the embankment, blocking the right lane completely. Lead vehicle is stopped, Reyes said, his voice tight and controlled. Second vehicle braking hard. They don't know what happened yet. The second vehicle didn't know what happened because the shot had been suppressed and the distance was so great that the acoustic signature reached the convoy well after the impact. Emma was already calculating the second target before they understood they were under fire. Second shot, second vehicle engine. Miss, she hit the front panel but not the block, and the vehicle kept moving, slowing but not stopped. Partial, she said, already adjusting. Third shot, same vehicle. Hit. The engine died. The vehicle coasted to a stop, now blocking the left lane. The road was effectively closed. 2 vehicles stopped, Reyes said. The convoy is blocked. I have fighters dismounting from vehicles 3 and 4. They're taking cover. They still don't know where the fire is coming from. A pause. Some of them are pointing at the sky. They think it's air support. Let them think that, Emma thought, and she was already engaging the third vehicle. 8:11 a.m. Extraction complete. Hayes' voice in the radio, and Emma heard something in it she had not heard from him before. Genuine relief, the thing that lives underneath command, competence, and only surfaces when the thing you've been holding your breath about is finally actually over. Rescue team is airborne. Ethan Walker is secure. Emma, stand down. You're done. She kept her eye to the scope for 3 more seconds. Old habit, her grandfather's voice in her head saying that you stay in the picture until you're certain the picture has changed. Then she lifted her head and exhaled and put her hand flat on the cold rock beside the rifle and just breathed. Reyes lowered his binoculars. He looked at her. Something had been shifting in his expression since the first vehicle stopped, and now it had settled into something she recognized because she had seen it on her grandfather's face and on her father's face, and on the faces of people who had just watched something they hadn't believed was possible and were now in the process of revising themselves. Emma, he said. Her name, not her rank, not Carter. He hadn't done that before. She looked at him. I have been in special operations for 16 years, he said. I have worked with the best shooters in the world. Men who trained their entire adult lives for exactly this kind of work. He stopped. I don't know what you are, but what you are, it's not something the program built. It's something the program missed. He shook his head slowly. We've been missing it for a long time. Emma sat up. The morning was fully bright now, the Nevada sky gone from dark to deep blue to the flat, clear brightness of full daylight. Somewhere below them, 4 armored vehicles were stopped on a mountain road, and 30 fighters were trying to understand what had just happened to them. Somewhere in the air, a helicopter was carrying Ethan Walker back to his family. She said, "How many application cycles does the sniper program run per year?" Reyes blinked. 2. Why? Because I want to know how many people like me are in those applicant pools right now, she said. Not just women, people who come from outside the expected profile, people with the ability and the knowledge and the work and the scores who are getting the same rejection letters I got. She looked at him steadily. Because if one of them just saved the mission, what are the others doing right now? Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the question Hayes is going to be asking himself for the next 6 months." "Good," Emma said. She began breaking down the equipment. "Then maybe 6 months from now we get somewhere." 8:23 a.m. By the time they reached the bottom of the ridge, a vehicle was waiting. Doyle was behind the wheel, and when Emma climbed in, he handed her a bottle of water and a granola bar. Without a word, which was exactly the right thing to do, and she was grateful for it. They drove back in silence for the first 3 minutes. Then Reyes, sitting in the front passenger seat, said without turning around, "The behavioral analysis you ran on the target's camera appearances, is that something you developed yourself, or did you study it somewhere?" "A combination," Emma said. "Ton. My grandfather used to call it reading the enemy's theater. He said every man who performs has a script, and if you watch long enough, you find the script." She paused. "I formalized it using behavioral pattern literature I found in academic journals, applied it to operational contexts on my own." "Academic journals," Reyes said. "I had a lot of free time during the parts of my career where I was being ignored," Emma said. From the driver's seat, Doyle made a sound that was definitely a laugh, quickly suppressed. Reyes turned and looked at her. "When Hayes talks to SOCOM about the new initiative, and he is going to talk to them today, I know that man. I want you to present the behavioral modeling framework alongside the atmospheric modeling. Together, they constitute a targeting methodology that doesn't exist anywhere in current doctrine." Emma looked at him. "You want me to write doctrine?" "I want Hayes to make you write doctrine," Reyes said. "There's a difference. One of them gets funded." Emma looked out the window. The base was coming into view ahead of them. She thought about the last 3 years, the applications, the rejections, the late nights at the kitchen table building, things nobody had asked her to build, the quiet fury of knowing exactly what she was capable of and having no door that would open onto it. She thought about the moment she had stepped forward in the command center and said 6 words and felt the weight of 15 trained men's skepticism like a physical thing pressing against her chest. She thought about the sound the room made when the shot landed. "Okay," she said. "Let's write doctrine." 9:14 a.m. The base looked exactly the same as it always did. That was the thing that struck Emma when they pulled through the gate, the guards at the checkpoint, the vehicles moving between buildings, the ordinary machinery of a military installation doing what it always does, completely indifferent to the fact that 3 hours ago, everything had almost gone catastrophically wrong. Bases don't change when missions succeed. They don't change when they fail either. They just keep running. And the people inside them carry whatever happened with them into the next thing and the next thing after that. Emma carried it quietly. She had been trained her entire life to carry things quietly. Not by the military. The military had barely acknowledged she existed until this morning. By her grandfather, who had come home from 2 wars and never once let anyone see him buckle under the weight of what he'd seen. By her father, who had spent 30 years solving problems that other engineers called unsolvable, and who had never once described that work as difficult, only interesting. The Carter family had a particular relationship with pressure. They didn't talk about it. They just applied it back. Doyle parked the vehicle and Emma stepped out. Her legs were stiff from the climb and the position and the cold, and she did not let herself limp because old habit, and she walked straight to the equipment bay to secure the rifle before anything else. Because that was protocol, and protocol was something she had always respected, even when the people enforcing it hadn't respected her. Reyes walked beside her. He had been mostly quiet on the drive back, which Emma had appreciated. She was not ready yet for the larger conversation, the one about what came next, about programs and doctrine, and the machinery of institutional change. She needed a few minutes first, just a few minutes to let the morning become something that had happened rather than something that was still happening. The rifle was secured by 9:22. Emma signed the log, handed the case to the armory technician, and stood in the equipment bay for a moment with her hands at her sides and her eyes on nothing in particular. Reyes said from behind her, "You doing okay?" She turned. "Yes, sir." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He was watching her with the particular attention of someone who has spent years reading people in high-stress situations and knows the difference between fine and functional. Emma had learned to pass for fine when she was only functional. She had been doing it for 3 years. But something about this morning had worn the performance thin. "I'm processing," she said. "Take your time," he said. "Hayes doesn't need us for another 30 minutes. She nodded. He left her alone, which was exactly right, and she stood in the equipment bay for 4 minutes and let the morning settle into her bones and become real. The shot, the secondary targets, the convoy. Ethan Walker's voice on the rescue team's radio, she had heard it for just a second, rough and exhausted and alive. The debrief, Reyes sang her name like it meant something. 4 minutes. Then she moved, 9:31 a.m. Hayes's office was a room that told you exactly who he was without him having to say a word. No decorations except 2 photographs, one of his unit from a deployment 9 years ago, one of a woman and 2 boys who were obviously his family. A whiteboard covered in operational shorthand that he clearly hadn't erased in weeks. A desk with 3 separate stacks of paper, each stack organized with the kind of precision that suggested the organization was meaningful, not habitual. The man understood his own systems. Emma respected that. He was on the phone when they arrived and he held up one finger without looking up, and Emma and Reyes took the 2 chairs across from his desk and waited. She caught pieces of the conversation. SOC, OM1, on Washington, something about an after-action timeline in a formal review. Hayes's voice was steady and flat, in the way it was always steady and flat, but underneath it, Emma could hear something moving, the particular energy of a man who has just been given leverage. He has been waiting a long time for and is being very careful about how he uses it. He hung up and looked at both of them. SOCOM wants a full after-action by end of week. They've already seen the drone footage. He paused. General Marsh saw the convoy engagement. He wants to talk to you, Carter. Emma said General Marsh. 3 stars, head of Special Operations Forces Development. Hayes looked at her directly. He called me 12 minutes ago. He used the word unprecedented. I want you to understand what that means coming from that man, because it's not a word he uses. Emma kept her expression still. Inside, something shifted, not excitement exactly, but the particular feeling of a door opening that you had stopped believing would ever open. She had learned not to trust that feeling too quickly. Doors that opened sometimes also closed, and the closing hurt worse than if they had never moved at all. What does he want to discuss? She asked. The new initiative, Hayes said, which is no longer stalled. He put both hands flat on the desk. Here is where we are. 14 months ago, I submitted a proposal to restructure precision shooting candidate selection around measurable performance metrics rather than background profile matching. SOCOM liked the concept. They didn't like that I couldn't prove the existing system was producing suboptimal outcomes. He looked at her. This morning, I proved it. In the most visible way possible in front of 15 of the program's best products with drone footage and radio logs and an after-action record that nobody can argue with. Reyes said, what's the timeline? Fast, Hayes said. Faster than I expected. Marsh wants a pilot program structure on his desk in 30 days. He paused. And he wants Carter attached to the development team as a subject matter expert. The room held that for a moment. Emma said carefully, Sir, I'm a specialist. Formally, I'm a weapons technician in a support role. The structure of a pilot program for a precision shooting initiative would typically involve. I know what it would typically involve, Hayes said. I also know that the woman who just made a confirmed kill at 4,300 yards with a 6-second wind model she built in 90 minutes while everyone in the room was ignoring her is exactly the person who should be telling us what we've been missing. He held her gaze. Your rank is a paperwork problem. I have people who fix paperwork problems. What I don't have and what I need is someone who can look at this selection system and tell me where it's broken. Because you know where it's broken, Carter. You found every crack in it for 3 years. Emma sat with that for a moment, then she said, I needed something in return. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Reyes went very still. The program reviews rejected applications, Emma said. Not just mine. Every application that was turned down in the last 5 years without documented specific cause. We go through them the same way I went through that when data, looking for the interaction effects that the standard model missed. She leaned forward slightly. Because I am not the only one. I know I'm not. The math says I can't be. Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Done, 9:47 a.m." The call with General Marsh happened at 10 o'clock sharp, and it was not what Emma had expected. She had expected formality, a three-star general calling to acknowledge an operational success, to express interest in the program, implications to be polite and thorough, and ultimately to hand the conversation back to Hayes and let the institutional machinery do what institutional machinery does slowly. General Marsh was not slow. He was a compact man on the video screen, gray-haired and direct-eyed, with the particular quality of attention that very senior military leaders develop after decades of being in rooms where every word costs something. He looked at Emma for about 3 seconds before speaking, and what he said was not congratulations. "Specialist Carter, I watched the drone footage twice. I want to know one thing before we discuss anything else." He leaned slightly forward. "When you were building that wind model in the command center, at what point did you know it would work?" Emma said. "After the second missed shot, sir. When I saw the consistent rightward deviation at a fixed margin. That told me the error wasn't random. Random errors scatter. Consistent errors have a cause." Marsh nodded slowly. "You're telling me you identified a systematic flaw in the targeting methodology from the pattern of the misses?" "Yes, sir." "How long did that take you?" "About 7 minutes," Emma said. "The model took the remaining 83 minutes. Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "General Hayes tells me you've been rejected from precision programs 3 times." "Yes, sir." "That's a failure of my institution," Marsh said. "I want to be direct with you about that because I think you deserve directness after what this system puts you through." He paused. "What I'm about to ask you is not a consolation prize. I want that to be clear. What I'm about to ask you is based on what I watched on that drone footage this morning and nothing else." Emma waited. "Emma, I want you to break the program," Marsh said. "Not the new one, the existing one. I want you to go through the selection criteria, the evaluation structure, the rejection protocols, everything. And I want you to find every place where we traded capability for comfort, where we selected for familiar over excellent, where we built a system that was really just selecting for people who already look like the people who built the system." He held her gaze through the screen. "Can you do that?" Emma said, "Yes, sir. I've been doing it in my head for 3 years." Marsh almost smiled. "Almost. Thought you might say something like that." He turned to Hayes. "Michael, whatever she needs. Personnel access data, make it happen." Hayes said, "Already started, sir. 10:18 a.m. The word moved through the base the way words move through closed communities, faster than anyone sends it, slower than it feels like. By mid-morning, people Emma had worked alongside for 2 years, without being truly seen, were looking at her differently in hallways and doorways, in the break room where she had eaten lunch alone more times than she could count. Some of them were genuine. A fellow technician named Ramirez stopped her near the equipment bays and said simply, "I always knew you were something else, Carter. I just didn't know the word for it." Some of them were the particular awkwardness of people who had ignored her for years and were now trying to locate a version of themselves that hadn't done that. She didn't hold either one against anyone. She understood how systems worked on the people inside them. What she didn't expect was Webb. Marcus Webb found her at 11:40 in the afternoon, sitting in the secondary analysis room, running the first pass of the rejected application review that Hayes had authorized. He knocked on the open door. He actually knocked, which told her something, and stood in the doorframe with the expression of a man who had been composing something in his head for several hours. "You have a minute," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He looked at the screen. She had opened the application database, the scoring records, the rejection logs. He said, "How many so far?" "I've reviewed 63 applications from the last 2 cycles," Emma said. 14 of them have no documented specific cause for rejection and assessment scores in the top 15%. She paused. 3 of them scored higher than the lowest scoring candidate who was accepted in the same cycle. Webb was quiet for a moment. 3 people who scored higher than accepted candidates got rejected. With no documented reason, Emma said, which means someone looked at the file and made a call they didn't write down. Same thing that happened to me. Webb put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands for a moment. It was a very human gesture from a man who had spent 16 years projecting the opposite of human vulnerability, and Emma let it be what it was without comment. Then he looked up. I was on a selection board, he said, 2 years ago. Second cycle. He stopped. I don't remember specific files. I reviewed maybe 40 applications over 2 days. But I remember the feeling we moved fast. We had a sense of what we were looking for, and we went through the stacks quickly, and the ones that didn't feel right got set aside. He looked at her. I don't know if I set aside anyone who should have been accepted. I genuinely don't know. And that is the worst part of telling you this. Emma looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me? Because you're going to find it anyway, he said. And I would rather tell you myself than have you find it in a file. He paused. And because I think it's the right thing to do. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, were you the selection board reviewer for cycle 2 year before last application batch 7? Webb went very still. How do you know that? Your name is in the documentation log for that batch, Emma said. She turned the screen slightly toward him. Batch 7 had 4 applications with top 10% scores and no documented rejection cause. One of them was mine. The silence that followed was long and complete, and neither of them tried to fill it with anything that wasn't true. Finally, Webb said, I'm sorry, Emma. She nodded. I know you are. That doesn't fix it. No, she said, but what you're going to do next might. She turned the screen back. I need someone who knows how selection boards actually work, not how they're supposed to work, how they actually work to help me write a new evaluation protocol that closes the gaps. Someone who has sat on those boards and knows where the informal judgment calls happen. She looked at him. That's you, if you're willing. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, I'm willing. Good, Emma said, and she pulled up a new document. Then let's start. 12:33 p.m. They worked through lunch without noticing. Doyle appeared at some point with sandwiches that neither of them asked for, set them on the edge of the table, and left without a word, which was exactly the right thing to do, and Emma made a mental note to thank him properly when this was over. The work was not glamorous. It was the kind of work that institutional change is actually made of going through documentation line by line, identifying the exact points where a structured process permitted. Unstructured judgment, mapping the gaps between what the protocol said should happen and what the logs showed actually happen. Emma had done this kind of analysis before in other contexts and other systems. The methodology was always the same. You follow the data to the deviation, and the deviation tells you where the human hand went off the written path. In this case, the human hand had gone off the path consistently and in a consistent direction, and the direction was away from candidates who didn't look like the candidates who had already been accepted. Webb saw it too, and to his credit, he did not flinch from it. He sat beside her and went through file after file and called what he saw clearly and without deflection. This one's rejection doesn't track with the scores. This one has a comment in the informal notes that shouldn't be there. This one was borderline on one metric and excellent on 4 others. And the borderline metric got weighted higher than the protocol specified. That weighting, Emma said, pointing to the screen. Who has the authority to adjust metric weights during a board session? The board chair, Webb said. It's supposed to require a documented justification. Is there one here? Webb leaned forward, studied the file. No, Emma marked it. That's 17 now, she said. 17 what? 17 instances across 5 cycles where the board chair adjusted metric weighting without documentation. She pulled up a chart she had been building. In 15 of those 17 instances, the adjusted weighting moved a non-traditional candidate from the acceptance zone to the rejection zone. She let him look at the chart. That's not an accident, Webb. That's a pattern, and a pattern is a system, just not the one anyone wrote down. Webb stared at the chart for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all day. Who were the board chairs? 3 different people across 5 cycles, Emma said. I don't think it was coordinated. I think it was unconscious. I think each of those board chairs genuinely believed they were making the right call. She paused. That's actually worse. Conscious bias you can address directly. Unconscious pattern bias is built into how people see. You have to change the structure so the structure does what the people can't. Webb looked at her. You've thought about this for a long time. I had a lot of applications rejected, Emma said. 1:47 p.m. Hayes appeared in the doorway at exactly the moment Emma had pulled up the summary report of everything she and Webb had built that morning. He looked at the screens, looked at both of them, and said nothing for a moment. Then he came in and stood behind Emma's chair and read. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. Webb sat quietly. Emma watched Hayes's face in her peripheral vision, the particular stillness of a commander absorbing something that is simultaneously worse than he expected and exactly what he suspected. When he finished reading, he straightened up and said, "How solid is this?" "The data is solid," Emma said. "The interpretation is defensible. Every instance I flagged has documentation that supports the flag. Some of it will require a formal review to confirm I've marked those separately." She looked up at him. "But the pattern is real, sir. This isn't noise. 17 documented instances of undocumented metric adjustment, 15 of which moved a non-traditional candidate out of acceptance. That's a finding." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "This is going to be uncomfortable for some people." "Yes, sir," Emma said. "It should be." He looked at her, then at Webb. "Marcus, you've been on those boards." "Yes, sir," Webb said. "I've told Carter everything I know. I'm in this process completely. Whatever the review finds, I'm ready to answer for my part in it." Hayes nodded slowly. "All right." He pulled out his phone and made a call that lasted 40 seconds, and when he hung up, he said, "Marsh wants the preliminary findings on tonight's call. Can you have a clean summary ready by 1700? Emma looked at the screen, looked at the clock. 3 hours and 13 minutes. "Yes, sir." "Good." He turned to leave. Then he stopped. He turned back. "Carter, one more thing." She looked up. "The people we find in those rejected applications," he said, "the ones who got turned away. What do you want to do about them?" Emma had thought about this. She had been thinking about it since the drive back from the ridge, since Reyes said her name like it meant something, since Marsh said the word unprecedented. She had been building the answer the way she built everything methodically from the ground up, piece by piece, until the structure could hold what it needed to hold. "Contact them," she said. "All of them. Invite them to apply to the pilot program with a clean file and a new board." She paused. "And I want to be on that board." Hayes held her gaze for a moment. "Done," he said, and left. Webb exhaled slowly beside her. "You know what you just did," he said. "You just built the thing you needed 3 years ago." Emma turned back to the screen. "I know," she said. "That's the point." She pulled up the next file and kept working. 2:09 p.m. The afternoon moved fast the way afternoons move when the work is real and the stakes have not come down yet. Emma and Webb built the summary report together section by section, and somewhere in the middle of it, the dynamic between them shifted into something neither of them named because naming it would have interrupted the work. Webb knew the institutional structures, the exact language, the specific protocols, the particular sensitivities of senior officers reading finding that reflected on their commands. Emma knew the data and the methodology and the argument that the data made when you arranged it correctly. Together, they built something that was better than either of them would have built alone, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it because the work spoke for itself. At 3:47, Reyes appeared. He looked at both of them, looked at the screens and said, "Hayes told me. I want to read it." Emma turned the screen toward him. He read standing up, which was how Reyes apparently read everything, like sitting down for information was a form of surrender. He went through the full summary without speaking. His jaw tightened twice, once at the metric weighting section, once at the aggregate pattern analysis. When he finished, he looked up and said, "The 3 applications in batch 7, the ones who scored higher than accepted candidates." "Yes," Emma said. "Do we know where those people are now?" Emma pulled up the search she had already run. "One is still in the military, different MOS. One left the service 18 months ago. One is in a federal law enforcement role." Reyes said, "Can we reach them?" "We can try," Emma said. "We're going to do more than try," Reyes said, and there was something in his voice that had not been there this morning. Not the authority of rank, which he had always carried easily, but something older and heavier. The weight of a man who has just fully understood something he should have understood earlier and is deciding what to do with that understanding. "We're going to find every one of them, and we're going to give them a real answer for what happened to their applications. Not a form letter, a real one." He paused. "From me, personally." Webb looked at Reyes. Something passed between them. The particular look of two people who have known each other a long time and are in the middle of becoming slightly different versions of themselves. Emma said nothing. She added Rhea's name to the summary as a contributing reviewer and kept building. 4:52 p.m. 8 minutes before the call with Marsh, Emma saved the final version of the report and sent it to Hayes. Then she sat back in her chair and allowed herself for exactly 60 seconds to feel the full weight of the day. It had been 11 hours and 5 minutes since she stepped forward in the command center and said 6 words. In those 11 hours, she had made a shot at 4,300 yards, engaged 8 secondary targets, stopped an armored convoy, sat through a debrief that rewrote the room's understanding of the morning, been asked by a 3-star general to dismantle a broken system, and spent the afternoon building the evidence that proved how broken it was. She was 26 years old. She was tired in a way that went past muscles and past adrenaline and settled somewhere in the deeper architecture of a person, the part that carries not just the physical effort, but the emotional weight of finally being seen after years of being invisible. It was not an unpleasant tired. It was the tired of a person who has put everything they have into the right thing at the right moment, and the moment held, and now the body is asking for its due. She gave herself 60 seconds. Then she sat up straight and opened the call. Marsh's face appeared on the screen. He looked at her, then at the report she had shared to the briefing system. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Specialist Carter, this is the most important document produced by this command in the last 5 years." He paused. "And I'm going to make sure it's the last time someone with your capability has to fight this hard for a room to look at them." Emma said, "With respect, sir, I'm going to make sure of that myself." Marsh looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, I believe you will." 5:03 p.m. The call with Marsh ended at 5:02, and Emma sat alone in the analysis room for exactly 4 minutes after the screen went dark. Not because she was processing, not because she was emotional, because she had learned a long time ago that the moment right after something significant happens is the one moment you can actually feel the weight of it clearly before the next thing arrives and pushes it back, and she wanted to feel it. She had earned the right to feel it. Then she stood up and went back to work. The report was submitted. The pilot program framework was approved in principle. Marsh had used the words expedited review, which in military institutional language meant something that normally took 18 months was going to happen in 30 days. And Emma knew enough about how systems move to understand that 30 days was both incredibly fast and also a very long time when you were holding the evidence of everything that had been lost inside the slower version of that system. She pulled up the rejected application list and started building the contact protocol. Webb found her at 5:31. He stood in the doorway with his jacket in one hand and the expression of a man who had been awake for too long and was running on something that wasn't quite adrenaline anymore, but was doing a reasonable impression of it. "Hayes called a team dinner," he said. 1,800 hours. He wants everyone there, including you." Emma kept her eyes on the screen. "I'll be there." "Carter." She looked up. "That's not optional." He was very specific about the including you part. She looked at him for a moment. Then she saved her work and closed the laptop. 6 p.m. The dining facility on base was not a place that typically held moments of significance. It was a room built for function, long tables overhead, lighting the particular smell of institutional food that every person who has ever served in the military carries in some permanent memory file. Emma had eaten in this room alone more times than she wanted to count. She had sat at corner tables with her tablet and her textbooks and her ballistic tables and let the room move around her without being part of it, because being part of it had never exactly been on offer. Tonight, the room was different. Hayes had arranged a specific table, not a private room, not a formal setting, just the back corner of the regular facility with enough chairs pulled around it for everyone who had been on the operation. The 15 snipers, the intelligence officers, Kowalski, Doyle, the meteorology team, Emma. She walked in last, which was not intentional, and the room did something that rooms don't normally do, it noticed. Not dramatically. Nobody stood up. Nobody made a speech. But there was a shift in the quality of the attention, a collective turning that was different from the way a room turns when anyone walks in, and Emma felt it in the way you feel something that has never happened to you before and that you did not know you were waiting for. Hayes gestured to the chair directly on his left. She sat down. Reyes was across the table. He nodded at her. She nodded back. Hayes raised a coffee cup. He was not a man who made toast with anything stronger, which Emma had heard about and now confirmed was absolutely true. And he said, "Today was a hard day. It was a day where we found out some things about ourselves that needed finding out. I'm not going to make that sound better than it is." He paused. "What I am going to say is this. The person sitting to my left walked into a command center at 0500 this morning, said 6 words, and then spent the next 11 hours proving that excellence doesn't care who you are or where you come from or what the forms said about you. She made a shot that nobody in this room could make. And then she spent the rest of the day building something that means nobody who comes after her has to fight as hard as she did to get a fair chance." He looked at Emma. "That's not a small thing, that's everything." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Torres, who had barely spoken since the debrief, said, "Hear, hear." And it wasn't formal and it wasn't theatrical. It was just a man saying the true thing in the plainest way, and that made it land harder than any ceremony would have. Emma said, "Thank you, sir." She meant it simply, and she said it simply, and she let it be that. Then Doyle from 3 seats down said, "Also the granola bar, that was clutch." Laughter broke through the room like a pressure valve releasing, and Emma laughed too genuine and surprised, and the dinner became what Hayes had intended it to be. Not a ceremony, not a performance, but the thing that people who have been through something hard together do when the hard thing is over. They sit down, they eat, they let the room breathe. 6:47 p.m. It was Reyes who brought it back to something real. The way Reyes tended to bring things back to something real because that was who he was at the core, a man who respected the truth enough to say it even when the timing was imperfect. He was talking to Webb about the convoy engagement when he stopped mid-sentence and said, "Can I ask you something, Carter? And I want a real answer, not a professional one." Emma looked at him across the table. "Ask. When you were on that ridge the second time, when I asked if you needed a spotter and you said you didn't." He held her gaze. "Did you mean it, or were you testing something?" The table had gone quieter around them. Not everyone had stopped their conversations, but the people closest had, and Emma was aware of being listened to in a way that felt different from this morning's briefing. This was not professional attention. This was personal. "Both," she said. "I genuinely didn't need a spotter for the vehicle shots. Engine blocks don't move unpredictably. The math is cleaner." She paused. "But I also wanted to know if I could do it alone, because every time I'd been rejected, the implied message was that I wasn't enough, that I needed something I didn't have. I wanted to know when the moment was real and nothing was theoretical whether that was true." Reyes said, and it wasn't true," she said. "It never was." Reyes nodded slowly. He looked down at the table for a moment, and when he looked up again, something in his face had moved. The particular movement of a man who has been carrying something and has just set it down, not all the way, but enough to feel the difference. "My daughter called me this afternoon," he said. Everyone at the table heard it because he had stopped making any effort to speak quietly. "She saw something on the news preliminary report, nothing detailed, just that an operation in Nevada had a successful hostage recovery. She didn't know I was involved. She called to say she'd heard there was a woman in the unit who made the shot." He stopped. "She said, 'Dad, is that true?' And I said, 'Yes.' And she was quiet for a second, and then she said, 'Good, it's about time.'" He looked at Emma. "She's 19. She sees the world more clearly than I did at twice her age." Emma said, "She sounds like someone worth listening to." "She is," Reyes said. "She is." 7:19 p.m. The dinner broke up gradually, the way good dinners break up, not all at once, but in small groups, people drifting away in ones and twos, with the particular loose-limbed ease of people who have been wound tight for a long time and are only now beginning to come down. Emma stayed until near the end because Hayes stayed until the end, and she had learned today that staying was sometimes more important than the words you say while you're there. When the room was mostly empty, Hayes pulled his chair closer and put a folder on the table between them. Emma recognized the format, the SOCOM header, the classification marking the document control number in the corner. "Pilot Program Authorization," he said, "signed by Marsh at 1830. He pushed it toward her. "You're officially attached as a founding member of the development team as of today. Temporary duty assignment pending formal review of your records and rank evaluation." He paused. "The rank evaluation is a formality. I want you to understand that. Marsh's office has already indicated the direction. Emma looked at the folder without opening it. What direction? Staff Sergeant Minimum, Hayes said, with a technical specialty designation that doesn't currently exist in the system. We're creating it. He held her gaze. The designation is Precision Engagement Analyst. It's for people who do what you do, who combine ballistic science, atmospheric modeling, and behavioral analysis into a targeting methodology. We're building the classification around what you demonstrated this morning. Emma was quiet for a moment. You're building a job title around one person. We're building a job title around a capability, Pune, Hayes said. You're just the first person who showed us what that capability looks like when it's fully developed. He leaned back. It won't be the last. That's the point. She opened the folder, read the first page, closed it again. 30-day pilot timeline, she said. First candidate review board in 6 weeks. I want the board composition written into the authorization, not just the criteria, the actual composition. Minimum 30% of board members must be from non-traditional specialties. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You want board composition in the authorization document? Yes, sir. Because if it's not in the document, it's a preference. And preferences disappear when leadership changes. She held his gaze. I have seen what happens when good intentions don't have structure behind them. I was the result of that for 3 years. I want structure. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll call Marcia's office tonight. Thank you, sir, Emma said. She stood up. He stood with her, which was not something Hayes typically did, and she noticed it and she let it be what it was, a gesture from a man who was not good at gestures, but was making one anyway because some moments require it regardless. 8:02 p.m. The base was quiet by the time Emma walked back to the barracks. The kind of quiet that descends on military installations after a hard operational day. Not empty, never empty, but settled. The machinery still running, but running softer. She was almost at her building when her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then something made her stop walking and accept the call. Specialist Carter, a man's voice. Careful, like he had rehearsed the first sentence. Speaking, she said. My name is David Chen. I was a sniper candidate, Cycle 2, 2 years ago. I'm told I was told today by a Major Reyes that I should call you. A pause. He told me what happened this morning, and he told me about the application review. Another pause. He told me that my application was rejected without documented cause and that my score would have placed me in the acceptance range. Emma stood very still on the path between buildings. Yes, she said, that's correct. I left the service 8 months ago, David Chen said. I'm in a law enforcement role now. I thought I just wasn't good enough. That's what you tell yourself when there's no other explanation. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath the control that Emma recognized because she had felt it herself for 3 years. Major Reyes said there's going to be a pilot program. He said you were going to contact all the applicants who were turned away. Yes, Emma said. I was going to call you tomorrow. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. Is this real? He said it simply without embarrassment. Because I need to know if this is real before I start thinking about it again. Because I stopped thinking about it a long time ago, and I'm not sure I can go back to wanting it if it's not real. Emma understood exactly what he was asking. She had asked herself the same question at 5:02 this afternoon, sitting alone in the analysis room with the screen dark. She had asked herself if the door that had opened was a real door, or did the kind of door that opens in the particular cruel dream of a person who has been told no enough times. She said, it's real, David. I'm going to make sure it stays real. A silence. Long enough that she checked if the call had dropped. Then he said, okay. Just that, okay, but the way he said it told her everything about what that one word was carrying. I'll call you tomorrow, she said, with the formal details. We'll talk through everything. Thank you, he said. Specialist Carter, thank you. She put the phone in her pocket and stood on the path for a moment. The night was cold and clear and very quiet. She thought about her grandfather, about the porch and the untouched coffee and the thing he used to say about the difference between calm and discipline. She thought about what discipline had actually meant across the last 3 years, not the discipline of the shooting fundamentals. Though that too, but the deeper discipline of continuing to build the proof when nobody was asking for it, of submitting the third application when the second had failed, of walking to the front of the command center at 5:43 in the morning and saying 6 words into a room full of people who did not believe her, and meaning every one of them. She had not been calm. She had never been calm. She had been disciplined. And the difference, as her grandfather had always said, was everything. 8:44 p.m. She was sitting at her desk with her laptop open, working through the contact list when the knock came. She said, "Come in," and the door opened, and the person standing there was the last person she expected, Ethan Walker. She had only seen him on a screen before this, the grainy live stream footage, the drone feed, the brief second of his voice on the rescue team's radio. In person, he was taller than she had expected, and he looked like a man who had been through something and was still in the first hours of understanding that he had come out the other side. His left eye was swollen, partly shut. His lip was split. He was wearing borrowed clothing she could tell from the fit, and he was moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose ribs hurt. He stood in her doorway and looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "They told me who made the shot." Emma said, "How are you feeling?" "Like I got thrown against a wall several times," he said. "Which I did." He paused. "Can I come in?" "Yes," she said. He came in and took the chair across from her desk, the same chair Webb had taken that afternoon, the same chair that had been filling up all day with people who had something they needed to say to her. He sat down carefully, favoring his left side, and looked at her with the direct, assessing gaze of a man who spent his professional life reading people and was now reading her. "I have 2 kids," he said, 8 and 11, a girl and a boy. He stopped. "This morning at 6:17, I was in a building waiting to be executed by a man who was very serious about it. And then the world shifted, and the guards went down, and the rescue team came through the door." He held her gaze. "I didn't know who made that happen until an hour ago. I needed to come say it to your face." Emma said, "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," he said. "I need to want to. There's a difference." He leaned forward slightly. "Thank you, Specialist Carter, for my life, for my kids having a father tonight, for whatever it cost you to step forward in that room when everyone was telling you to sit down." He stopped. "I know something about rooms that tell you to sit down. I spent 20 years at rooms that told me what I couldn't do. I know what it costs to stand up anyway." Emma held his gaze. She did not look away, and she did not minimize it, and she did not give him the professional deflection she had been giving people all day, because this was different, and he deserved something different. She said, "I'm glad you're going home to your kids." He nodded. He didn't say anything else for a moment, just sat with her in the quiet of the room, and it was not an uncomfortable quiet. It was the quiet of 2 people who had been through the same morning from opposite sides and were sitting now in the aftermath of it, understanding each other without needing to explain. Then he said, "Hayes told me about the program, the new initiative." He paused. "He told me what you found in the rejected applications." "Yes," Emma said. "How many asayo?" 14 confirmed so far, possibly more." She paused. "I spoke to one of them tonight. He left the service. He thought he wasn't good enough." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's the damage you can't put in a report," he said. "The people who walked away believing the wrong thing about themselves." He looked at her. "What do you do with that?" Emma said, "You find them, you tell them the truth, and then you build something that means the next generation doesn't have to find out the hard way." She paused. "It doesn't fix what happened to them, but it changes what happens next. That's the only direction anyone can actually move." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You're going to change things." "I'm going to try," she said. "No," he said quietly. "You already are." 9:27 p.m. He left 15 minutes later, and Emma went back to the contact list. She worked through it methodically, the way she worked through everything one file at a time, building a complete picture before moving to the next. By 10:30, she had drafted individual contact letters for 11 of the 14 confirmed cases, each one specific to that person's file, each one containing the actual documented reason their rejection could not be supported by their scores, each one extending a formal invitation to the pilot program first board. She had been awake for 22 hours. Her body knew it, even if her mind was still running. At 10:47, she saved everything and closed the laptop. She sat in the dark for a moment and let the day be what it was. The whole weight of it, from the pre-dawn command center to Ethan Walker's face, to David Chen's voice on the phone saying, "Okay," in that particular way that contained everything he had been carrying for 2 years. She thought about something her father had said to her once when she was maybe 15 and had failed an advanced math exam and had come home furious and certain that the failure meant something permanent about her capability. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where she would later spend her nights building ballistic models that nobody had asked for, and he had said, "Emma, the only thing a failure tells you is where the gap is. Your job is to close the gap." That's it. That's the whole job. She had closed the gap. She had closed it at 4,300 yards in the dark before dawn with a rifle and a model that nobody had believed in and 6 seconds of silence that had changed everything. And now she was closing a different kind of gap, a wider one of FAMO, the kind that doesn't announce itself with a missed shot, but quietly accumulates in rejection letters, in undocumented board decisions, and men who leave the service believing they weren't good enough, when the truth was that the system looking at them wasn't good enough to see what they had. She was 26 years old, and she was tired, and she was more certain of her direction than she had ever been in her life. She stood up, turned off the light. At 6 in the morning, 37 days later, Emma Carter stood at the front of a room that held 22 people, the first graduating class of the Precision Engagement Pilot Program. David Chen was in the third row wearing his uniform again for the first time in 8 months, sitting straight with the particular posture of a person who has been given back something they thought they had lost. There were 11 others from the rejected application review. Small-town recruits who had never been given a second look. Support personnel who had built expertise in the margins of careers that had underestimated them. Men and women from backgrounds that the old selection system had never thought to look toward. Reyes was standing against the wall to Emma's left. Webb was beside him. Hayes was in the back. General Marsh had flown in that morning, which nobody had expected, and he was standing beside Hayes with the expression of a man who came to see one thing and found something larger than he anticipated. Emma looked at the room. She let herself look at every face, really look the way she had always looked at problems completely without flinching until she understood what she was actually seeing. Then she said, 6 weeks ago, I walked into a command center at 0500 and said 6 words to a room that did not believe me. I want to tell you what those 6 words were because they're the most important thing I can teach you. She paused. I said, "Sir, I know how to do it." That's all. No credentials, no history, no permission. Just the statement of a person who had done the work and was ready to do the thing. She looked across the room. Every single person in this room has been told in some form by some system that you are not the answer, that the answer looks like something other than you. I know what that feels like. I know exactly what it costs to keep going anyway. She stopped. Keep going anyway. Do the work that nobody asked you to do. Build the proof that nobody has requested yet. And when the room finally goes quiet enough to hear you say the true thing, say it without apology. Say it like you mean it. Because you do mean it. You've always meant it. The room just wasn't listening yet. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. Then David Chen started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster, and the room rose around it. The way rooms rise when something that should have happened a long time ago finally happens, and the sound filled every corner, and Emma stood at the front of it and let it be real. Reyes caught her eye across the room. He nodded once. She nodded back. Hayes was looking at his shoes for a moment, in the way people look at their shoes when they are feeling something they weren't prepared to feel in a professional setting. Then he looked up and his eyes were clear and steady, and she understood that he was not a man who would ever fully say what he was feeling, but that what he was feeling was real. General Marsh leaned toward Hayes and said something Emma couldn't hear. Hayes said something back. Marsh nodded slowly. Emma turned back to the graduating class. You are not here because you were the obvious choice, she said. You are here because excellence doesn't announce itself. It waits. It builds. It does the work in the dark for as long as it has to. And when the moment comes, it delivers. She paused one final time. The most dangerous thing in the world is not a weapon. It's a person who refuses to let someone else decide what they are capable of becoming. You are that person, all of you, every one of you in this room right now. She let it land. Go prove it. The room rose again, all 22 of them, standing. Not because they were told to, not because protocol required it, because some moments demand it, and this was one of them, and every person in that room understood exactly why. Emma Carter had walked into a room at 5 in the morning and said 6 words. She had made the shot nobody could make. She had found the people the system forgot. She had built the structure that would make sure the forgetting stopped. And she was just getting started.